why we do what we do, take...
You mean do it here? I'll just do it here. Why we do what we do, take one, I'm hoping take one only. All right. So I'm Donnie Haulk, President and CEO of AE Global Media. I'm going to be teaching a little bit about why we do what we do, why it is that we process information in the way we do, how we think about it, what it means to our body, mind, and soul. God created us in three parts. And what we do is we process information in three parts. But I think it's important to start with where AVL started, which is in Genesis 1. When God said, "Let there be light." When he said what he said, he created the universe. We're created with a sound wave. When God spoke us into existence, it was through sound. So the most important thing that we can do when we're designing a worship space is know that the first thing God did was said. He spoke us into existence. So when we're looking at our building plans, when we're looking at the facility that we're going to be worshiping in, we need to pay attention to the acoustic environment. Can we be heard? Can we understand what's being said? Is everything intelligible? Does it make sense? After he spoke us, he said, "Let there be light." So the second priority is light. And we're going to talk about lighting a little bit later. What is good lighting? There's a big question about that. And what we're doing here on this set today, this is a broadcast lighting look. We're going to break that down and talk about how we achieve a good broadcast lighting look. So after the lighting was in place, and he then started building the stage, the earth. He separated the waters from the land, put the stars in the sky. Adam, Eve, the animals, named everything, stood back. He didn't say it was good until he had built the stage and the set piece. First is audio, our acoustic environment, the energy that comes from our mouth, and then how we transmit that. Then there's lighting and how we see what we see, the lightness and the dark, and then creating the stage and set piece. So when the stage and set piece is built, then God stepped back and he said, "This is good," and he rested for a day. So that's all good stuff. So how is a human created? So we have a body. I call it a tactile interface. Our body is what interfaces with our environment. We have skin, we touch, we feel, we vibrate, we emote, we energize, we have sound waves that we create, we absorb sound waves and energy. When someone speaks to you, you're absorbing their energy because our word is power. It is energy. And so this energy that a human creates is energy that's absorbed by other humans. So this is our body. We see things. We have two eyes. Our eyes locate. So a human looks at the lightest thing, the brightest thing. They watch the thing that moves, and they pay attention to the loudest thing. So those are three key components for good stage design. What's the brightest thing? What's the loudest thing? What's the thing that moves? So we pay attention to those things because of our eyes and our ears. So our eyes judge distance. Our ears locate where sound is coming from. We have two ears so we can locate where that's at. So our brain is processing this information that we're not even thinking about. So we don't even think about all the code that is happening in our brain processing this information. So we have the tactile interface. We have our CPU, our brain, our central processing unit that's processing the information from our eyes, our ears, our tactile interface, our vibrations of our body. And then we have our soul. And I'm going to spend some time talking about the interfaces that happen within this unit that we have that God created and we call a human. So our soul interacts with our mind. Our mind interacts with our body. So when we create worship environments, we need to create environments that are immersive so that our tactile interface can be communicating with our mind with our soul, and our soul with God. God doesn't communicate with our body. God communicates with our soul. So we're going to be talking about that, how our mind and our tactile interface process and work together, and then how our soul and our mind process and work together. How we worship and experience the environment around us is critical. How do we hear? How do we process that information? Emotion and color. We're going to talk about emotion, how emotion is a part of that soul and mind connection. focus and feature lighting, intelligibility, how we understand what we understand, elemental focus, ministry brand, and nonverbal communication. What are you saying with everything around you? What are you saying with things that aren't coming out of your mouth? This is the number one place that most ministries need to work today, especially in this time we're having to communicate from different places and reach our people because we're in social distancing and we can't get together as one, as a body, as a church, when we're having to separate out. So what is it that you're saying through this camera lens? So the camera lens is picking up information that you don't intend for it to pick up, or you're not aware that it's picking up. So you're setting an impression, you're making an impression with that camera lens through things that you're not aware of that you're making the impression on. So what is behind you? What is on the platform? What is in your living room? What is in your office? These are things that people are looking at and get sidetracked by and don't pay attention to what you're saying. So when you have things that are talking louder behind you than the message that you're trying to bring, you have a distraction. Distraction is not of God. Distraction is a bad thing. So when we're communicating the Word of God, we want to be plain, we want to be simple, we want to be straightforward, we don't want to have any distractions around us. And this is the number one issue that I see, and I've been watching these different sermons come out for the last couple weeks and been looking at Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and all these social media platforms, watching these pastors upside down on the screen, sideways on the screen with all the stuff behind them that they are not aware that's being shot on video. You have to be aware of those things. You have to look at them. You have to pay attention to them and be aware of what you're saying. So I'm going to go back for a moment and talk about what happens to your mind, to your central processing unit, when your eyes and ears don't agree with what's happening around you. So it's called listener fatigue. So listener fatigue sets in when your eyes and ears don't agree with your environment. So if pastor's up on the platform and he's speaking to you, and you're sitting in the seat or the pew, and you see pastor clearly in front of you, your eyes are saying, your mind has already done a calculation. Pastor's 35 feet in front of me, 15 degrees off to the right, elevated by 30 inches. Your brain's already told you all this, whether you realize it or not. Your brain knows all this. But then your ears are saying, no, pastor's up over here, because pastor's voice is coming from a speaker that's 20 feet in the air and 45 degrees to the left. But your eyes are saying, no, pastor is right here in front of me. He's 30 inches high, 15 degrees to the right, and I see him right there, and he's 35 feet from me. But then they hear the speaker. So now the brain is confused. The brain says, the eyes are telling me pastor's here. The ears are telling me pastor's there. What do I do? So what happens to the average human is after 18 or 20 minutes, they forget about where pastor's at, and they pick up something they can control. Whether it's a bulletin or their cell phone, pencil, pen, whatever, their brain is not comfortable. So their brain wants to get comfortable. So their brain says, okay, let's stop a minute. Let's get something in control that we know. We know this device is right here in front of us. We know exactly where it's at. It's called distraction. And distraction is not a good thing. But yet, that's what we do to live people. So when we're talking about remote people, the distraction is visual. What's around you? What's around pastor? What's happening? Is there anything distracting from what pastor's trying to say, which is the most important thing? Preaching God's word, the most important thing. So we don't want to distract from that. We want to design video systems, lighting systems, so that clarity is achieved by what they say. Our central processing unit is the thing that takes in the information from our eyes and our ears. We call it a brain. There's some physicist that says that not all the processing happens here. And I do agree with them that our whole tactile interface, we have pieces of us that we really don't comprehend or understand how they communicate, but they process information. So our bodies, and especially musicians, our bodies are processing information in a way that's unique to a musician, unique to a vocalist. For instance, what happens, we all have this definition of in the pocket. The band, musicians playing in the pocket. Everybody playing in the groove, playing together, singing together. The definition of the musicians playing in the pocket are all the musicians striking the same note within 6 milliseconds, 6 to 7 milliseconds, millionths of a second. So every musician, every vocalist hitting the note precisely within 6 to 7 milliseconds of each other. That is really, really, really quick. Our ears, if you're a trained audio guy and can mix and are used to listening to signal paths, then you can hear down to 2 or 3 milliseconds. The average musician can hear 6, 7, 8 milliseconds without a problem. They might not realize it, but they can. Their brain's processing this information. The average congregation member or listener that loves music, they can process also at that 8 to 10, 12 milliseconds. You got some people that don't pay attention. They're not necessarily music lovers. They're not paying attention to musicians playing together, and they think a record is just one musician playing everything when there could be 40 musicians on there playing. They can't separate it out. But musicians are built in a different, special way. They can hear these things. They can hear the separation. So when you're a musician and you're hearing things, and everyone has to strike the same note within 7 or 8 milliseconds of each other, and some would argue 6 milliseconds, it's really fast, millionths of a second, then all the musicians have to play together. So this is where body language comes in, as well as knowing the other musicians. When they watch someone sway, when they watch that movement, we're processing that information of where one is at. Where is the beat? Our feet feel the vibration of the stage. This is why I particularly like wood floors in stage design, because a musician hears with their feet almost as well as they hear with their ears. We pick up that vibration of the kick and the snare and the toms and the bass guitar. We feel it. So we feel that musical vibration. It's also why the sound pressure level is important for the congregation, for all of them to sing and clap on one. Where is one? So they can hear where one is at, and they can process that information and sing together. God says there's a power, there's an energy, there's a spiritual thing with the congregation singing as one, singing together. So there's a certain volume level that has to be achieved for that to happen. I'm speaking at the rate in this room of about 85 decibels. So if I'm speaking at 85 decibels, if someone is a little bit louder than me or within 3 dB of me, then that's a distraction. So when the musician is playing, that's why we need to be in the high 80s, 90, 91, 92, so that the whole congregation can hear and sing and clap and worship together when the music is being played. So there's physical reasons as to why the sound pressure level is what it is, the frequencies are what they are, and why we look where we look. Our processor is processing all that information. So all the musicians striking within 6 to 8 milliseconds. So let me explain milliseconds in distance. Because when I speak, the sound of my voice travels 1,124 milliseconds at 68 degrees in normal atmosphere. So if I'm speaking here and you're listening to me at 30 feet away, that's roughly 30 milliseconds. This is also why the bass player and the drummer always want to be within 8 feet of each other, because the sound traveling at 1,124 feet per second, 1 foot per millisecond. And so if the drummer and the bass player are closer together, it's easier to stay in the pocket, because the arrival time of the sound happens before they have to strike the note. If the bass player is further than 8 feet from the drummer, say the bass player is 15 feet from the drummer, which never happens without in-ears because they just don't like it. They're going to walk over to the bass, they're going to walk over to the drummer. The bass player is going to move over there because he's not comfortable. So because of arrival time, if he's further than 8 feet, then he has to anticipate. So if he's 15 feet away, that's 15 milliseconds arrival time for natural acoustic energy to hit him, then he has to anticipate by 8 or 9 milliseconds. Musicians don't like to anticipate, especially modern worship musicians. This is why we have a conductor. So we have a conductor because when we have a symphony, we spread people out over 40 feet. And light travels 186,000 miles per second. So when a conductor gives time visually, that time arrives so much faster to your central processing unit because light travels 186,000 miles per second. So if you want the band to be on cue, or your orchestra to be on cue, or your choir to be on cue, it's important that they follow the direction of the cue. So with light traveling as fast as it travels, it really helps the musicians not to anticipate. They're just following their eyes. They're just watching the conductor. So they're playing, anticipating. They're not listening to what they hear. They're looking at what they see. But most modern musicians, 5-piece band, 6-piece band, they don't go off that visual. Now, they might watch a keyboard player, or they might watch a rhythm guitar player, or they might watch a lead singer sway, and that is directing as well, because we're directing with our body language. But the bottom line is when you're further than 8 feet, you either have to anticipate or you're going to be late. Now, in-ears, a new modern tool, a wonderful technology. In-ears let you hear within 1 millisecond of that kick being hit. from the microphone, from the kick, from the beater head hitting the drum, to the microphone picking it up, sending it to the console, back to your in-ears, with most audio systems, is less than 1 millisecond. That means the average musician has 5 to 6 milliseconds to think about life before they hit that next note. It's very important. So once a musician gets hooked on in-ears, it's actually them being a little bit lazy because they haven't been able to hear that well or be on time or play in the pocket as easily as they can. But the in-ears let them hear within 1 millisecond. That means they can play easily together. So one good argument for in-ears. Of course, the other argument is the volume on the stage. But the best argument is that all the musicians playing together. But our brain is very special. We don't have a computer like it. We don't have lenses like our eyes. We have no devices like our ears. God created this instrument as we have it to do amazing things. And when we worship together, when we grab a bunch of humans and put them in a room, it's powerful. There's an emotional connection, and that's the soul connection that I was talking about when I started this series. The soul connection to our mind and our body and to God. So our mind, our central processing unit, is very important. We have to know that these tactile interfaces, that we move, that we feel, that we emote, and we're going to talk about emotion. So where does emotion come into play with what we're doing? Emotion is the reason that we don't have an intelligent device, a robot that can think, a computer that can think. Emotion is the difference. Every decision that a human makes has an emotional core, an emotional base. And because that's how a human makes a decision, programmers can't figure out how to get a computer to have an emotion. The biggest reason is they don't know what an emotion is. It's my theory that emotion is that soul connection with the mind. It's something that's deeper than a thought. It's something that's inside of us and we can't explain. When you read the Bible, and you hear about how a person heard from God, or maybe you've experienced this. I know I've personally heard this. It's often described as a small, still voice or something inside that you knew God was telling you. That's that emotional connection to the brain. That emotional connection to the brain is very important. It's how God communicates with us. Emotion is the circuit from the soul to God. It's very important to understand as a church with the big C, as a church, as a whole, we get nervous about emotion. And sometimes we don't know how to deal with it. Emotion can get out of control. As a worship designer, as an engineer, as someone who studies God's humans and how He created us, it's important to me to make an emotional connection in a song. So our emotion is connected through our soul into our brain, our processor. How we create the environment that we're in is very important. Whether you're broadcasting from home in your living room, where you're sitting, the lighting angle on you, what people see around you, the tone of your voice. It's an emotional thing. We hear emotion in people's voices. Our brain processes this information. We judge pastors by the tonality and their body language, how they say what they say. When a human is nervous or upset or angry, the vocal cords constrict. We hear that. Sometimes they raise their voice. Let me talk about that for a second, because preaching, by definition, sometimes is raising your voice to emphasize a point. Nothing wrong with that when it's intentional and you mean to emphasize that point. When a pastor is having to raise their voice and talk at this level because they're trying to communicate in such a way as to get the word to the last person in the last pew so they can be heard, then they're having to constrict their vocal cords and they're raising their voice to communicate that. That's when the sound system's not doing a good job for the pastor, because the pastor seems like he's angry when he's just trying to communicate or she's just trying to communicate. But when you can relax your vocal cords and speak at a normal rate, 80 to 82, 83 dB, then you sound relaxed. You don't have to say that you're relaxed, because if I'm shouting at you, I can say I'm happy, I'm relaxed, I'm fine. It's not read as you're happy. you're relaxed, you're fine. It's read as you're angry or emotional about something because you have constricted your vocal cords. You have tightened those muscles up, and we're reading that as something that maybe it's not. Maybe it is, but maybe it's not. It's unintentional communication. The consequences of unintentional communication is if you say that you're happy, but you don't look happy, you don't sound happy, the lighting is wrong, you look a little angry, you look a little shifty, you don't look trustworthy. Those are unintentional consequences that happen in I wouldn't say every church, but I'd say about 90% of the churches. When you have a pastor that doesn't communicate or is not being perceived to be able to communicate well, sometimes it's simply the sound and lighting not letting them do what they should be doing. And some pastors that have great sound and great lighting need to relax into that moment and talk at levels that are natural, communicative, so that they don't have to raise their vocal cords. They can talk in a natural way and communicate in a very intimate, personal way. Because when you're shouting at somebody, it's hard to be intimate. It's a difficult, intimate moment when you're shouting at them. But when you can relax and have an intimate moment and a lower tonality of your voice, then you can get a point across in an easier way, in a conversational way, in an intimate way. So how we sound when we're speaking, how we address our vocal cords, whether we raise our voice or lower our voice, it's all a communicational tool. So is our face. If our face doesn't say we're happy, you're not going to be perceived as happy. If our body language isn't that way, if our vocal is not that way, then the person that's watching this is not going to perceive that. Now, here's where we cross the lines from live into video capture. When we cross over to video capture, all you got is what somebody's seeing. They don't know you. So if they judge you in a few minutes to be an angry, yelling person, then that's who you are to them. That judgment happens on average in 5 to 6 seconds on social media. When they're scrolling through your feed and they see this, you're judged within 5 or 6 seconds. What are they seeing around you? How are you presenting? How are you communicating? How do you look? Do you look shifty? Is the lighting bad? Is the angle wrong? Is it too dark? Is it too light? Is it blown out? You got all this stuff around you that says you don't know what you're doing. They're going to scroll on by. So to stop the scroll, the first thing is to look the way you want to look. Be intentional with what people see. So we want to look exactly the way we want to be seen. Now, another mistake that some churches make is they portray one thing in video. People come to your church and they see a whole different thing. You're confusing them. Your video, the way you shoot, what you do with your video, your stage design, your platform, your social media, it all needs to blend together. You don't need to be saying one thing on YouTube, another thing on Facebook, another thing on Twitter, and then when they show up live, it's a whole different experience. Your architecture doesn't match what you're saying or how you're presenting the gospel. Your platform doesn't do that. Your praise team doesn't go with what your words are. You're saying it needs to be one ministry message, and grow the church as a ministry message. You can be very diverse in your platform, with your people, with your song structure, with your message and your delivery, but it needs to be consistent. So I know what I said is a little bit of a mystery, being diverse and being consistent. It's absolutely achievable. You want people to be comfortable with who you are. In today's demographic, in today's society, people need people to communicate with them in a real, honest, and true way. And if they don't perceive you as being honest and true, they're not going to listen to you. They're not going to pay any attention to what you're saying because you have been judged as not to be truthful. The first thing we want is our pastors and our ministers to be truthful. Video says things that we don't intend with bad use of lighting, bad use of camera angles. If your camera's too high, you look like you were caught on a security camera stealing something. By having your camera angle shoot down at you is not a good thing. You do not want to have high camera angles. You want to have a camera angle that's on my eyeball. You don't want to have a camera angle that's too far below you because then you look like you're preaching down at them. People don't like for you to preach down at them. They don't like for you to look down at them physically. or on the camera. That's why camera 1 is a great shot straight on, straight in the eye, so that you can communicate with people and look them straight in the eye through the camera lens. And when you have alternate camera positions, you can do the same thing. And then you can use that with your video switch to be able to make that into something dramatic that people will want to watch. And we'll talk about drama in video in another session. But drama in videos are very important because drama brings emotion, and emotion is communication. So we won't be able to pay attention to what we do with our camera placement, our lighting placement, to bring that drama, to bring the emotion that we want to have and not the emotions that we don't want to have. Thinking, listening, and remembering are all parts of the central processing unit. To think, remember, and listen, or to listen, think, and remember, or to remember, think, and listen, whichever way you want to say it. Our eyes are important, our ears are important, and then how we're processing that information. And it's been proven time and time again. Putting the sermon notes up on the video screen brings retention to the processor because we're hearing it and we're seeing it. You get 60 to 80% more retainage if we demonstrate our scripture and our sermon by using visuals, especially words, reading those words. So when we design the space, we want to know that we've got a human that we're communicating with, and this is the way God created us to be communicated with. Very specifically. We're created in a very specific way. So as long as we pay attention to the physics of the ways of how we're created, then it's easier to design tools to communicate with. And it's easier to design environments for humans to be communicated with. And we design these environments so that we can get the most important message that God has given us to tell, and we can tell it the way it needs to be told so it can impact lives. Our soul is who we are. This shell is just a shell. The processor, it's a processor. Our soul is eternal. While we're here on earth, we have a shell, we have a processor. Communicating with the soul is every pastor, minister's goal. What we're talking about here on the physics side of what we do is how to get through the tactile interfaces, through the central processing unit, and to the soul. A soul is not definable. It's another reason that we won't have, we're talking about AI, artificial intelligence. I started talking a few minutes ago about artificial intelligence and decision making. We don't have a computer that can make a decision. We don't. We've got millions of computers. We've got huge computers. We've got computers that take up a city block, a gigawatt of electricity to operate. When God created this computer and it fits inside of our skull, the energy that it needs is basically a potato, and it processes like we can't even figure out how it's doing what it does. It's an amazing thing. The emotion that our bodies feel, that we feel, that our soul feels, impacts our processor. Every decision that a human makes has an emotional root, an emotional connection. It's that emotional connection that makes you decide, I like white tennis shoes. I like black tennis shoes. I like a hoodie. I don't like a hoodie. I like a jacket. It's that emotional connection to that thing that you wear that makes you happy, that you like, that you put on. The very word I like it is hard to define because it's an emotional statement. I like it. So the emotional connection that we have is the reason that we don't have a processor, because we don't have a processor that can have an emotion, because we don't really know what an emotion is. Emotion is the connection to God. It's our soul's connection to God. When we feel God's presence, when we feel God speak to us, we hear that still small voice inside of us. That's the emotional connection that we have with the maker of all things, the creator of all things. Our circuit to God is our soul. Our soul is connected to our processor, and our processor to our tactile interface. As ministers, as pastors, as me, as a worship designer, as an engineer that designs worship spaces, I have to pay attention to these tactile interfaces. It's why we worship the way we do. It's why we have some sanctuaries that are grand in shape and form, and the architectural is amazing. It's why we have other sanctuaries that are blackened out, and we have lights in there, and we have color. And it's each human's choice of, do I go to a Gothic traditional cathedral to worship, or do I go to a modern manufacturing building that has been converted into a church with some lights and sound and video? It's our emotional connection to the space around us. How do we feel? And we have spaces for all. We have 396,000 churches in America. It's not because we can't get along. I used to say that. We have 396,000 churches in America because we can't agree or we can't get along with each other. It's not that. We have preferences. We have preferences in the way that we want to be communicated with. And it's important to the ministry team that you have to be able to identify what your community, how they want to be communicated with. And in today's time, with what we're doing now with video and being sequestered in our homes and being locked down in our cities, it's important that you know how to shoot good video so that you can communicate well. When talking about lighting, it's important to know how we measure light. So we have different words that we use. I like to measure light with foot candles and using a light meter. And so just knowing that I'm using the light meter and what my foot candles I'm shooting for, I like lighting a pastor between 45 and 50 foot candles with modern cameras. And I'm standing at you right now being lit at 48, 50 foot candles, depending on which way I turn my face. All right, so this area that I'm standing in right now is set up for a broadcast. So we've got an LED wall set behind us, high refresh rate broadcast LED wall, and we've got 5 points of light. And we used a combination of Fresnels and ellipsoidals. So we have 4 Fresnel, LED Fresnels, hitting the 4 corners. And then we've got 1 ellipsoidal as my key light. So when it comes to foot candles, it's good to have a good meter to measure with, because otherwise you're just guessing. And our eyes can see really well, and some people can guess pretty good. But knowing exactly what your foot candles are with a meter is so helpful if you're walking across a stage. As I said, I've lit this spot to be right here. I've got 5 feet that I can move. So what I did is, if you're the lighting director and you're the videographer, and I was the guy on this particular shoot, so what I did is I boxed myself in so that I would stay in good light. I put a table here with a laptop. I got my water here, got my computer here. I'm boxed in to the right. I'm boxed in forward with a piece of tape. So I tick the floor to where I don't want to walk forward because I don't want to mess up camera focus for the guys. I want to make it easy. And then I box myself in from the back with a chair. It can be a stool, it can be anything. And if you trust pastor, a piece of tape. Most of you don't trust pastor. So having physical elements to box a pastor in is good. Now, pastor can still escape by going to the left. Now, what happens when I move to the left? I'm going to be moving out of good light. So watch me as I move to the left. You see how fast I drop off. I drop off really fast. Now as I come back into the light, you can see my light color, my temperature be right. Now, I'm a follically challenged, little overweight, white guy. I need 3,200 Kelvin. 45 to 50 foot candles looks good with me. Every skin tone and temperature has a different color Kelvin. Kelvin is the temperature of light. So the temperature of white has a Kelvin rating. The more orange you go, the lower the number. The more blue you go, the higher the number. Like cars and motorcycles look really good at 7,200 Kelvin. But white, follically challenged guys, they don't look good at 7,200 Kelvin. I look like a vampire. My veins start standing out because the blue light pulls the blood in the veins out of my skin. In fact, if you want to make a person look like a vampire, put them under 7,200 Kelvin. It creates the effect without using computers. I want to look natural. So the darker your skin tone goes, the higher you get to 4,200 Kelvin. So if you're a Caucasian, a white guy like myself, 3,200 Kelvin is good. I can look good up to 34, 3,500 Kelvin, 3,600 Kelvin. I start getting a little washed out. If your skin is dark, you want to get 3,800 Kelvin to 4,000, 4,200 Kelvin is a good for dark skin. And if you have a diverse stage, 3,800 Kelvin is kind of like that sweet spot between light and dark skin that people look pretty decent on. We have great LED lighting today that we can change the Kelvin temperature if we need to from the lighting console, which is really nice. So My Kelvin's 3200. I'm in this light right here. And I am at 48-foot candles. We'll call it 48-foot candles. Now, I'm going to ask Norman to come in a minute, and we're going to demonstrate the 5 points of light that you need to make a pastor look good on a broadcast. So I'm standing in a sound stage, and Norman's standing here to my left, and I'm going to point out some lights. I've got a key light. The key light is dead in front of me. Now, most pastors don't like a key light below 40 degrees. In fact, pastors prefer that key light to be up 50, 60 degrees. However, it won't make the pastor look good. Pastor looks good when that key light comes down about 30, 35 degrees. That's where you want that key light. And I'm a little bit low today because I'm used to lighting, and I'll let it come down a little bit low, because the lower that light comes, the more weight I lose. Fact. That light gets high, I gain weight. The worst light that you can have for a pastor in the entire sanctuary, and most architects do this, is a light fixture right above pastor's head. The architect and electrical engineer is thinking, well, I need to put a light up there so that they can read their Bible from the pulpit. But when you put that light there, it makes you gain 30, 40, 50 pounds. It puts shadows under your eyes. It puts shadows under your chin. It makes you look a little angry because of that shadowy look that you get, especially if you have a brow that comes out a little further. You can look really angry, a little unintentionally. You don't look normal. You don't look natural. So to look natural, you bring that key light down. The lower you can have it, the better. Then I've got my left and right side field lights. My left and right side field lights allow me to look to the right and still not be shadowy, look to the left and still not be shadowy from the camera. And the camera's sitting at my key light position. I've got a camera at my key light. I've got a camera at my right angle light, which is intentional. We want the lights coming in line with the camera because we want the camera to pick up my eyes and our face, and when we smile, that our teeth look good. So we want the camera looking in at the same light as the angle if we can do it. Now, for every position that I am on the platform, I need these 5 forms of light. My last 2 lighting positions are my 45-degree off-axis to my left, my 45-degree off-axis to my right. Those are very important lights. These are lights that congregations don't like, but are needed on platforms for stages that broadcast, because what these lights do is they separate me from the background, and they bring me to the foreground. They make me 3-dimensional. Without these lights, I'm 1-dimensional. I'm a flat image. So if I just have a key light, then I'm going to be shadowy to my left or my right. If I just have a key light with left and right lights, then I'm going to be flat on the video screen. But if I have rear lighting to my left and my right, and my side field to my right and my left, and my key light, then I look natural, and I'm well lit, and I can turn my head, and I can communicate with people as I turn, and I'm natural. So these are the 5 points of light. Now, how to achieve 5 points of light? You can ask my staff. I've done this in hotel rooms, living rooms, any kind of space you can think of. I've used windows that are natural light. I love using natural light whenever I can. And I'll open a curtain just a certain amount to get a natural light, or a blind to a certain amount. And I'll put my camera to angle that I get the natural light. And then I'll put reflections, and I'll put things in the room that will reflect. There's ways to achieve these 5 points, but the 5 points are important, especially for you if you're trying to shoot in a living room or a pastor's basement or some other place. It's good to have good lighting. It makes your cameras look better if you have good lighting. There's no substitute for good lighting. Your cameras can shoot in low light, but if the angle's wrong, it still is not a good shoot. So good lighting is important. These are the 5 forms of broadcast. Now, before you Google me and say, what is good lighting? And you ask Google and you come up with 4,000 different opinions, let me explain this. Good lighting depends on who you ask the question. What is good lighting? Are you asking a videographer? Are you asking someone who's trying to set a mood with a song? Is this a worship set? Is this a concert? That's a different form of lighting. So you have dramatic lighting, which is one form of lighting, which is what theater does, and they bring drama from the position and the angle of the light. You have concert lighting, which is all the flashy stuff, the movement, the beams in the air, the haze, concert lighting, different form of lighting. And you have broadcast lighting. Broadcast lighting is when you want to communicate plainly and clearly with an audience that's not in your room, which is most of your pastors today. You're trying to communicate plainly and clearly with an audience that's not there with you. So you want to put yourself in the best light possible, which is a key light, left, right field light, left, right backlight.